Hi, everyone. Welcome to another video in my ASKability series. ASKability is a video series where I chat with other disabled people about how access, inclusion, and accommodations show up in their professional life. My name is Nico and I use he, him pronouns. If you're joining us today from the low vision or blind community, or even if you're just listening in, I'm a white man with slicked back blonde hair, dark glasses, a checkered dress shirt, and I'm seated in front of a set of bookcases. I'm wearing black headphones. I'm honored today to be joined by Jessica Lane. Jessica, will you introduce yourself, please?
Yes, thank you so much for having me, Nico. I'm Jessica Lane. I use she, her pronouns, and to give you a visual description as well, I'm a white woman with what some might say is large blonde curly hair, and I'm also wearing a pink blazer, and I have a small green plant next to me. So happy to be here.
Excellent, thank you. Jessica, tell me, what access features or tools do you use in daily life, and how do they help you?
Sure, thank you for this question. So I have what some may call a dynamic disability, and it's invisible. So sometimes I don't need to use any accessible features, anything of that sort, any tools, depending on how my body is feeling, given the chronic health conditions I have. So with endometriosis, with fibromyalgia, these being chronic pain conditions, and some being chronic inflammatory conditions, it really varies, like day by day, sometimes hour by hour. Sometimes I can walk for 20 minutes, sometimes I can only walk for 1 minute. So it really depends on the day, sometimes the moment, the type of activities, things of that sort. The things that I do use on a daily basis, I use a lot of heat tools to ease the muscle pain, muscle spasms that I have with the fibromyalgia. I use a TENS machine, which is a muscle, I'm not sure if you're aware of what it is. It's like a electromagnetic. You put these little stickies on you, and it's a little device that sends electromagnetic waves to your muscles, which can also help to ease some muscle strain, and can help prolong the amount of time I'm able to move and stand and be active. I use different massage tools, which help a lot. I also, if I travel, going to the airport, oftentimes I will use the wheelchair, because standing and waiting in lines, holding bags, things like that just do not work very well. So the wheelchair is a great access tool that I use often. And then just some other strategies, more than tools, to help with the dynamic part of the disability, and trying to see how I can be more mobile. So certain things like medications, light movement, stretching, planning the day well, depending on when brain fog or fatigue might set in at different times of the day, with muscle pain. So those are some of the things that I use. I also actually use a sauna blanket, which is really incredible. I don't know if you've heard of such a thing. So you might think of a sauna as this big, kind of like this little room you go into that you sit in, and it's really hot. And but now they make some that you can have at home. So it kind of looks like a large sleeping bag, but it has infrared sauna waves. So you plug it in, turn it up to a level that's comfortable, and it helps a lot to ease the muscle tension and muscle strain that comes with fibromyalgia. So that's a tool that has been really life-changing for me with these conditions.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you letting us know. And this is definitely a learning curve, probably for some of our listeners, and definitely for me. I had heard of a TENS machine before, but never a sauna bag. So I'll have to look that up. Thank you. If I could give you a magic wand, right, what access features or tools that you don't use right now, but would make the biggest improvement in your life? Like if you could totally rewrite your life and had the one size fits all access tool, what would that be?
I think that's such an interesting question, because I think with a lot of invisible disabilities, which come from chronic health conditions, it ends up being a lot of understanding in the medical field, proper diagnoses, having doctors and medical professionals like take you seriously when you come with having symptoms. That would be a major thing I would rewrite. And I know a lot of people, I'm in a lot of different communities, like for endometriosis, for fibromyalgia, for all different chronic health issues. A lot of people who identify with invisible disabilities, whether or not they're dynamic, meaning changing, or stable. A lot of us just wish we had doctors that understood earlier, that listened to us, that gave proper diagnoses a lot earlier, so that we could learn what's actually happening in our bodies, and then have an understanding of what like tools or approaches are even available. So for a lot of us, it took like 5 years, 10 years, even 20 years in my case to like understand what was even happening in my body, for a doctor to like really believe me. So I think to like, if I could rewrite everything, it would be like a lot more education for doctors, and a lot more of like a patient-doctor relationship, a trusting one that would happen. Because of that elongated time for diagnoses and getting the proper medical treatment, my ability to move, my mobility, my brain thought, all of that got like worse and worse and worse until I knew what was happening, so that I could understand the different approaches I needed to be able to live well. So there was a time where like I couldn't really stand for long or walk for long every single day, and it wasn't dynamic. It was more of a stable thing until I had the diagnoses and then proper tools that I could access. So I think improving the medical field, improving access to these tools is a huge one. So for example, with something like fibromyalgia, the muscle pain and muscle spasms, the one thing that helps the most is massage therapy, but that's seen as like a luxury, and of course isn't like covered by insurance, and is quite expensive. So that's a common one, I think, for certain like chronic health conditions, where what really is helpful like isn't covered by insurance. So it ends up being quite a cost. So I think that like having more access, having different tools be more available, I think. The other one would also be like an understanding and destigmatizing, talking about these things, especially like in the workplace. So I have a full-time job for an organization, but I luckily work from home. So I'm a remote worker. But I started working from home before it was a common thing with the pandemic. So it was a really big kind of struggle to figure out, okay, how do I even ask for the accommodations I need? What do I say? Everyone thinks I'm just like very healthy and active. Like I don't appear to have any disability needs. So the invisible disability thing is quite complex. So I think if I could rewrite certain things too, in the past, it would have been more of an understanding with colleagues that even though it's not visible, it's something that's very serious. And I therefore need to have these accommodations of working from home, of not lifting certain items, certain type of work that involves a lot more movement. I'm not as able to do anymore like I used to maybe 10 years ago. So I think destigmatizing, actually talking about this stuff and having people understand that disability doesn't just mean one thing. It doesn't just mean that there's these 5 visible conditions that people might, or certain things, and that's it. And if you look a different way, then, oh, you must be able to do every single thing possible that a human can do. So I think having a lot more understanding, compassion, and just talking about things more openly is something that I would like to see across different professions.
I think that's very valid. And a lot of what you said in that answer does resonate with me. I often think that what we now consider invisible disabilities would probably become quite visible if we as a society paid attention to disabled people, right? Because a lot of the symptoms that you mentioned from your invisible disabilities are quite visible. The fatigue, not being able to stand, sometimes using mobility devices, that's all real visible. And I'm sorry, I know I'm going off script, but did you say it took you 20 years for a diagnosis?
It did, yes, it did. So
Okay.
with the endometriosis diagnosis, it took me 20 years with doctors like really not knowing what was wrong. I think the issue with endometriosis, it's a chronic inflammatory full body disease. But since it's usually most common in people born female, so with female reproductive organs, and it's often associated with the menstrual cycle and having periods, it tends to just be pushed aside as like, oh, you just have regular period cramps. You're fine, take Advil. When really endometriosis is not a period disease. It's a full inflammatory body response to cells that are growing inappropriately in places where they shouldn't be growing. It's a very complex disease that has actually lost or caused people the loss of a lot of organs. So in my case, what endometriosis did was, yes, it affected ovaries and parts of the reproductive organs, but also it affected like my appendix. My appendix was twisted when they went in to do my endometriosis surgery. So it's really a disease that really wreaks havoc in a lot of the body. It can even be found up in the lungs, and people have breathing issues, respiratory issues, and doctors are like, you're fine, it's not a big deal, it's probably just allergies, right? So people are told these things for years and years. And in my case, it just got so bad that about, I guess it was, what year are we in now? About 4 years ago, it just got completely debilitating, where I was nonstop sick, couldn't really eat, had nausea all day, all night, wasn't sleeping, just in severe pain. It really also messes with your muscular structure, because when you're in pain all the time, you tense your muscles. And so my muscular structure was not working properly. So then walking became a major issue. So it really just like kind of becomes out of control for a lot of people without the diagnosis. And it was only when it got so bad that finally one doctor mentioned the word endometriosis. And I looked it up and I was like, oh, this is exactly what I have. How come no one's told me this word before? So it doesn't necessarily, for a lot of people, it's not necessarily a debilitating condition that leads to a disability. So it doesn't have to be if it's caught early enough and different strategies are in place. But unfortunately, for a lot of people also, it's not caught and it gets out of hand and it really wreaks havoc on the body and your ability to move, your ability to be active, the brain fog, ability to think clearly, ability to hold a job, to be able to be reliable and show up on time because you don't know how your body's going to be that day and what symptoms you're going to have. The fatigue is really overwhelming, which is also a very debilitating symptom that contributes to a lot of people going on disability insurance. So for me, I was on partial disability for a year because I really could not even hold my body upright for more than a few hours at a time. My muscles were too fatigued. So I was on partial disability for a while. And but then that can also lead to other debilitating conditions such as fibromyalgia, which is what I developed because of the delay in diagnosis.
I'm sorry you had to wait that long.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, I feel like it's just so important for people, again, like to talk about this stuff more so that there are other approaches and people know that, there's tools, there's strategies for this, there's ways to address different health concerns that, again, can lead to that invisible disability category or even visible, like you mentioned.
Right.
not being able to walk or being so swollen. You know, for a while my body was so inflamed and swollen. Those things are visible, but often not talked about.
Thank you so much for explaining a bit more about your diagnostic journey and what it was like to be undiagnosed. How are disabled people included or excluded in your community? Are there people or groups advocating for better inclusion?
That's a great question. I would say I'm part of a few different communities. I'll start with my work community. Recently, I think it's gotten a lot better. So I'm part of an employee resource group for disability, mental health, and caregivers. So that's something that was started, I think we started it about a year ago. And really what I saw happening was, like, once COVID hit, like before that, no one was talking about anything. No one was really talking about disability, at least where I work. No one was talking about disability. No one was talking about chronic health issues. No one was talking, it was kind of like, show up at work, give 120%, don't talk about your regular life or whatever's going on, and then like go home, do it all again the next day. I think what happened with COVID is we started to see that's not really possible. Like, people's lives are, they bring their full person to work. You don't just switch off if you have a disability. You don't switch off if you are a caregiver to someone with a disability or with a mental health issue. You can't just say, I'm going to leave that at home. I'm not going to take that with me to work. So we started talking about these things like a lot more at work. And from that, and the conversation around like diversity, equity, inclusion became really big as well the past few years. So I think that led the way to having these conversations at work. So for example, like last year, during Disability Awareness Month, we had a panel where we talked about, like, what does it really mean to be inclusive at work? Even though we can say, like, oh, sure, we put on our job postings that we don't discriminate against anyone with a disability, but then it also has on there, must be able to lift 20 pounds. So I'm like, well, I can't lift 20 pounds. That's part of my disability is I can't lift things. That action of lifting and carrying heavy weights doesn't work with my body. So I'm like, well, that will exclude a lot of people if you have that as something you need to do for a job, and it's not really required. So why don't we get rid of it? You know, so we got rid of that on our job descriptions, and some other things like came to light of like how we can actually be more inclusive at work.
Sure.
So addressing burnout, addressing like how many hours we're expecting people to work a day. I think that's one thing that is a bit exclusionary at work, is this thought that, oh, everyone can work overtime. Everyone has the ability to just, especially if it's a busy season, just like put in more hours, it's fine. For me, it's not really possible to put in more hours. You know, my body needs a lot more rest than people who don't have certain conditions. My brain fog will set in after a certain amount of time. And that's very hard to explain to someone who has never experienced brain fog or doesn't have muscle spasms happening. And so that's one way that I still see a lot of improvement needed. That's keeping people maybe away from this type of a workplace, is the amount of hours and the amount of like energy you're meant to really spend at work. But there are other good things like having paid time off that makes it more inclusive, having sick leave, Family and Medical Leave Act. That's something that the organization I work at includes. We also have office space. When I used to work in the office, we have a quiet room where I used to go every day and lay down, rest my muscles, stretch, do things like that. So those are a few ways that it is inclusive of people with disabilities. The other communities I'm in, so I live in Miami Beach, which has a lot of great things, I think, that make it inclusive. The sidewalks are great. The street, you know, everything is accessible as far as, you know, if you're in a wheelchair, it is able to get around. For anyone who may be blind, there's, you know, every street signal is really well, you know, everything's well laid out here. Right. But the beach obviously has issues with accessibility. I noticed that And this is something I really want to look into here, because I noticed that there will be some wheelchair access beaches, but then let's say the entrance to it is like covered with sand, like a pile of sand. And then, or the strip for the wheelchair ends at a certain point, and then there's no more. And I'm like, well,
Right.
how is that? So you just want someone to go like 3 meters in and stop. Like, what if they want to touch the water? Like, can't we extend this a little bit further? So I think there are certain things that do make it a bit exclusionary that I do really want to like look into more, but I'm somewhat new here in Miami. And the other thing I also do is volunteer work. And that was actually a really hard one, to find a volunteer activity that I felt I could do and like sustain that type of engagement. So I volunteer with the beach cleanup, and it's called Clean Miami Beach. I love the organization. But at first I thought, oh, I'll go and I can probably do about like 20 minutes of cleanup. What I learned is that that does not work with my
Right.
body. That level of movement, I was in a total flare up for many days and not able to move. So I contacted the organizer and I said, what can I do that would be more inclusive of someone with, this type of muscular condition that I have? And she's like, oh, join the crew. We can have you check in people at the beach cleanup. There can be a chair for that where you can sit. You can help write down the weight when we sort, how much trash gets picked up. And so she was very inclusive of like, okay, what can you do? What do you feel uncomfortable doing or can't do? How can we make this work for you? So I thought that was really wonderful to find a volunteer activity that didn't just assume I had the exact same ability as anyone else coming in, or didn't assume because I'm not in a wheelchair, because I'm not using a walking device, that I can still stand for 2 hours. They didn't make those assumptions about me, and we're very open to talking about, okay, how can we make this accessible? So that was a great thing to become involved in.
That's incredible. Thank you for doing that. Not only your volunteer work with Clean Miami Beach, but also advocating for better inclusion at work and like just slowly but surely making those inroads and that progress. I see the value in that. Step
Yes,
by
it
step,
does.
indeed.
Yeah, it takes that,
Absolutely.
right? It's like even an inch moving forward is progress. So
That's true. Small progress is still progress.
yeah.
This brings us to our last planned question. How would you specifically benefit from greater disability inclusion?
Yeah, I think a few things. I think one thing that comes to mind when thinking about this question is, if there were more individuals with disabilities like in the workforce,
Mhm.
or people who talked about this, I think that I would not have felt so isolated and lonely when figuring out like how am I going to continue working? How am I
Right.
going to do the things I want to do with new limitations that I have, new physical limitations? That was a huge struggle, because I like looked around at everyone that I work with, and everyone seemed to just go about life. There's no one with a visible disability. There's no one that was talking about an invisible disability at all. So I thought, I was very nervous to even bring anything up to my boss, to team members, to say, hey, I actually can't lift that. Can you lift that for me? Because I had no examples of that. I had no one I've really ever been in that workspace with had a visible, or again, talked about an invisible disability. So that felt very, very isolating. And that was one of the big reasons why I started to talk about it openly. Because at first I felt very embarrassed and very like, oh, should I not mention that I can't do certain things, or should I? But then I was like, why am I thinking like this? Why should I be embarrassed? This shouldn't be something that I should have any shame around.
That's right.
Instead, and that's when I started to learn a lot more and join different online communities, and learn a lot more about ableism. And I was like, oh, this is what's happening. This is why I'm feeling so I'm feeling ashamed, when really there's no shame at all in these things. So I really flipped that around in my mind and said, well, then I'll start talking about it. And I'm going to find those people at the organization. And it ends up that there's a lot of people with even what you're saying visible, but maybe you don't notice it all the time, visible disabilities and invisible disabilities, or people like myself who never identified with a disability until I learned like, oh yeah, I actually do need certain accommodations. And that's not a bad word to say, I have an invisible disability and I do need these accommodations. So that was also a shift for me that was like, oh, I can just say this. Like, this is the reality of what's happening. So I think that a huge benefit would be just that visibility, whether it's talking about it, seeing it, hearing about different conditions, different ways of living. I think that's huge. And there's still not enough of that. I wish I had certain like examples of this, like in my 20s or something, where I could look at people and say, or ask people questions that I knew had gone through similar things. So that's a huge one. And then I think also with that would also come a better understanding from people who are fully able-bodied to know that like not everyone has the exact same abilities, not everyone has the exact same energy level. And then they would plan things with more options for activities, more options for engagement. So for example, a few years ago when I had a lot more mobility issues than I have right now, I remember there was a staff retreat and it ended with a scavenger hunt around the city. And I was like, I can't do that. I need to like lay my body flat for a few hours and not move. And it, again, it just felt so isolating because I was like, I would love to socialize, but I can't move like that. And no one thinks I can't because I don't appear to have, or like you're saying, it might be visible, but people don't really know or notice like what to look for. So I ended up just like going home because I'm like, I can't do this activity at all. And there was no option of another activity. So I think raising awareness about this would make people who are planning these type of things say, oh, why don't we have one activity like a scavenger hunt? Why don't we have another activity where people sit in a circle and chat? Why don't we have, to make things accessible and have options? I think that's a really big thing. And in the workshops I plan, we try it, like we have a game room. So if you don't want to move around, you can just sit or lay on the floor and play a game with someone or whatever you want to do. Or you can go in the quiet room and meditate, or you can, so it makes people not feel excluded. And I think that would be something that I would benefit a lot from is, again, people having the knowledge and awareness so that they don't make assumptions that everyone can move or think or act or whatever it is, like exactly like they're able to. Because I get that a lot. It's like, oh, why don't we, or even with friends, let's say a new friend will say, oh, why don't we go do kayaking for a few hours and then go grab lunch and then see where the day takes us. And I'm like, why don't we just grab lunch for 1 hour? I think that's what my body is able to do. So again, that awareness raising and then giving like options of different types of engagement would be really helpful.
Valid. I see you in these answers. I see you saying that better disability inclusion would look like more activity options and more ability for you to fully engage with your community and with your friend groups. I see you in that. Jessica, thank you so much for joining me today. As we close, I want to give you a chance to talk about any activities you have coming up, any achievements that you've accomplished. Where can people find you online? What are you working on currently? This is your soapbox time, so take it away.
Sure. Yeah. So, one of the ways to find me online would be on Instagram. I have a page about endometriosis, where I try and raise the voices of other like activists and educators in the endometriosis community to spread accurate information. There's a ton of misinformation around, so much. So the page is called Endometriosis Together. So it's a long word, but Endometriosis Together. And that's where you can find more information about the condition and what it is, what it isn't, certain approaches to treating it. What does it look like if it gets to the point where it is something that you would consider an invisible disability or visible sometimes. So endometriosis together is a bit of a project I have on that. And otherwise, I think that's the main thing that I would say for now. I'm building out some other things, but when those come, I will let you know.
Fantastic. Thank you for all you do for people with endometriosis and for raising awareness of disability issues where you are.
Yes, thank you, Nico. I appreciate all you do as well. And thanks for giving me the chance to come here and chat with you.
Of course. Well, have a good rest of your day, my friend.
Thank you. You too.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.